Namaskar and thank you for joining us here this Thursday evening here in New Delhi, and whatever time it is of day or night, wherever you are in this world, you're watching World Today, where we bring you an update on world news with an Indian perspective. Let's begin with the headlines. Protesters take to the streets of Tel Aviv despite the Prime Minister Netanyahu's pause on plans to overhaul the judiciary. The protesters, they are against the plans to set up a separate national guard. The US urges Israel to come up with a compromise as quickly as possible. Tension between China and Taiwan escalates. Taiwanese president remains defiant, arrives in New York even as China threatens retaliation if she meets anyone of importance. Tsai Ing-wen says external pressure will not stop Taiwan from engaging with the world. China says the US House Speaker Kevin McCarthy meeting Taiwan's president would be a provocation. The UN General Assembly passes a resolution asking the world's top court, ICJ, to define the obligations of states to combat climate change. Historic resolution is seeking an advisory opinion from the ICJ. It's made it to the UN General Assembly after a 4-year campaign led by the Republic of Vanuatu. India celebrates Ram Navami, which is the birthday of Lord Ram. With religious fervor and gaiety, devotees throng temples to pay obeisance to Lord Ram. President Murmu greets the people on the occasion. And in sports, FIFA strips Indonesia of Under-20 World Cup hosting rights. FIFA removes Indonesia as host after the island of Bali refused to host Israel for tournament draw. Potential sanctions against PSSI may also be decided at a later stage. Let's begin with the big news. Protesters took to the streets of Tel Aviv again, despite Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's pause on plans to overhaul the judiciary. Many of the protesters say that they are against the plans to establish a separate national guard. Here's the story.
After massive protests for months, Israel finally witnessed some calm, though it was temporary, but a sense of peace prevailed at few places. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday hit the pause button on bitterly contested plans for a judicial overhaul amid fears that Israel's worst national crisis in years could fracture his coalition or escalate into violence.
We insist on the need to bring forth the necessary amendments to the judicial system and will allow the opportunity to achieve them through a wide consensus. It is an outmost worthy cause. Therefore, out of national responsibility, out of the will to prevent the rift in the nation, I have decided to suspend the second and third readings of the law in this term of the Knesset, in order to allow the time to reach that wide consensus ahead of the legislation during the next Knesset. This way or the other, we will bring a reform that will reinstate the lost balance between the authorities while preserving, and I will add, strengthening civil rights.
Away from the protests, the mood at the city's war front was different on Tuesday. Many taking an evening stroll said they were tired of the inconvenience of the protests or supported the judicial reforms.
Nothing's really changed. It's still ongoing. It just got pushed. But the fact that he really we were able to do something with these protests, with these pressures, with these strikes. It's really going to make a difference if we just keep going, keep up the pressure. It's the only thing that we can do, and it's show that it is working. And so it's really meaningful to be here.
We want to live where there's democracy. So of course I'm doing it for her. I'm doing it for her future. That she's going to have the same opportunities here that she would have in Europe, where we're from. Of course it's for her. Everything here for her.
United States President Joe Biden said on Tuesday he was very concerned about the recent events that unfolded in Israel. Speaking from the tarmac before boarding Air Force One in Durham, North Carolina, Biden said Israel cannot continue down this road, adding he's made that clear. He hopes Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will act in a way in which he tried to work out some genuine compromise.
Like many strong supporters of Israel, I'm very concerned. And I'm concerned that they get this straight. They cannot continue down this road. And I've sort of made that clear. Hopefully the Prime Minister will act in a way that he's going to try to work out some genuine compromise, but that remains to be seen.
But again on Wednesday, protesters took to the street of Tel Aviv despite Netanyahu's pause on plans to overhaul the judiciary. Many of those protesting said plans announced earlier in the day to establish a separate National Guard had brought them out to protest. This new force would come under the authority of hardline National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu voiced confidence on Wednesday that he would find a compromise with political opposition over his judicial overhaul. He asserted that Israel is a sovereign country that does not make decisions based on pressures from abroad. Now in his sixth term, Netanyahu straddles a religious nationalist coalition whose far-right members have stirred worry in the West for the future long-stall peacemaking with the Palestinians and the ability to coordinate strategies on Iran. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, what's the latest provocation then? It is the proposal for a National Guard. Coming up on the screen behind me, it's a little bit about this. The Israeli cabinet is going to approve this National Guard proposal on Sunday. The National Security Minister, Ben-Gvir, it's his proposal. Now, he is the far-right leader. Up there, you can see him in that image. And he wants this proposal put through. The proposal is to create a civilian National Guard. And the Israeli National Guard will be skilled and trained. It's going to be a special force, and they say it's for emergency situations and to tackle nationalist crime, to fight against terrorism as well, and to strengthen governance in areas where it is required. So basically, it's been giving, the idea is to give it quite a lot of powers, And it is going to be decided by a dedicated committee which is going to formulate its powers, because that's really the bone of contention. How much power you're giving to this National Guard? And this committee is going to examine how they're going to transfer units from the border police to the National Guard. The committee is going to formulate these powers within 60 days. So it's given 60 days time to formulate these the powers for the National Guard. But the initial budget of the National Guard is in new Israeli shekels, which is about 1 billion of that, and one of these shekels is in fact equal to 3.59 US. I beg your pardon, in fact it's the other way around. 3.59 shekels is $1 US. So that's the way it is. And Ben-Gvir says that the National Guard is a critical need of Israel. It's a critical need of Israel, that's what he says, because he feels that the country needs to have that kind of control over these kind of, perhaps what's happening behind me, those kind of protests, but also perhaps to have much more control of the executive, which is really the business of what these protests are about. The executive is just strengthening its hands. It will not be able to protect citizens without it, is what Ben-Gvir says. And the phenomenon of protection, nationalist crime, and to restore governance. So he believes that this is the way forward. This is the only way that Israel can actually keep itself safe. The agreement reached between Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu, this is really the bone of contention. It's basically a deal that these two leaders have agreed. This is an exchange for Ben-Gvir supporting the freeze on the judicial reforms, which Netanyahu announced on Monday. And the anti-government protests then called for new demonstrations because they realized that there was a deal that was done between these two leaders to put a pause on the judicial reforms. The protesters say that Ben-Gvir managed to extort it from Netanyahu, and the protesters are not going to agree to this exchange because they say that it's a Kahanist that is basically an extreme form of Zionism, which Ben-Gvir represents. He's a Zionist leader. He said that this is a force that you're giving extreme power to serve the racist interests of Ben-Gvir. That is basically what they are talking about. Let's bring in Dr. Seema Baidia from the Center for West Asian Studies to throw more light on the subject. Thank you very much, Dr. Baidia, for joining us. What would you say about this particular proposal for a National Guard? It's probably something that the people are not going to be in favor of, considering that it's going to just strengthen the forces of the military, create more of a police state.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, exactly. I think so. Because here we have to understand the difference between the government and the people. And, since January, what we are observing, this protest, people's protest, unprecedented in Israel since 1948, I must say. And these people, they are not going to buzz down, because the demand is not only the stalling of the process, but, they are demanding much bigger thing. So I don't think so that it will serve any purpose. It is really a political deal, I must say.
Okay, so what people seem to understand is that this is a deal struck between Ben-Gvir and Netanyahu, and so the people have been deceived. Earlier they thought that they had succeeded in putting the judicial reforms at bay, but then here comes something like this. Of course, it's going to take 60 days for a committee to decide the powers of this National Guard. But if we look at the judicial reforms itself, that also has just been paused. They have not actually said that they are, stopping it altogether. And the people on the street are looking for a future in which their people can live in harmony with one another. They have a more liberal understanding. But this is a very strong conservative view, which is coming from the right wing, more or less Zionist in its origin, that wants to have a greater Israel. Something that perhaps is, the old idea of what Israel was, a country that is for the Jews, which has a lot of the land, which the Arabs have.
Yeah, exactly. That is true. This proposal, the proposal for this judicial overhaul is the proposal which now has been paused, is to weaken the judiciary to the maximum possible extent. And if we see the composition and the proposals, where Supreme Court will not have any say to, see the validity of the basic law, whether it is unconstitutional or not, and the change of the composition of the Judicial Selection Committee, where the present coalition, national coalition government will always have the majority. Out of 9 members, the 5 members will always have the majority. The proposed composition is like this. Having said this, it is not only the judicial reforms that we have to see it from other perspectives as well. Even if we see that Jewish, people are in majority, but Arabs are there in Israel, and Arabs are in a very miserable conditions. And over the past, if I say the recent past, okay, some of the judicial verdicts, it was in favor of Arab people, which stop the settlement, the policy of the settlement. And what we know in Israel, this policy of the settlement, this is many illegal settlements, all over Israel. So judiciary played very important role. Okay. So it is not only the judicial reforms, but what judiciary plays role in Israeli system? That is the most important question.
Okay, so well, obviously they want a judiciary that is the whole reform idea is to try and have the deciding vote as to that the executive will decide who will be judges out of the 9-member committee that's going to decide the future judges. A majority of them will be, the majority decision making would be in the hands of the executive rather than in the judiciary. So that obviously affects the separation of powers over time. But the point is, well, I mean, when we look at the Israel doesn't have a constitution, so these are really ways in which the wings of government are trying to execute their own powers to see which how far they can go. In this context, do you see, the people coming out onto the street actually in some way backing the judiciary if they have to, because they still have time to pass judgments against, whatever's happening in the government?
Israel doesn't have written constitution.
Yes.
What we understand as Israel's constitution, if we have to say so, these are the basic laws of Israel. Now, why people are backing so much and people are protesting so much in Israel, that we have to understand. Because Knesset is unicameral legislature.
Yes.
And there is no federal system, I must say. So, in absence of written constitution, in absence of federal system, in absence of another body, or if it would have been the bicameral system, in absence of that, who has been protecting people's rights so far in Israel? It is the Supreme Court. Now, when this judicial overhaul system has been proposed by Netanyahu, then people understood that it is not only the far right proposal that will push Israel, nobody knows where, okay, but they are going to lose everything. So that's why people are on the streets, people are protesting so much, and people are not going to accept the little bit concession that is, that now it has been stalled, and then now this National Guard will be coming up after 60 days. So that is the main bone of contention. Then people were understanding that it's 9 million plus people in Israel, they are understanding that they are going to lose whatever freedom they have. So they have to be on the streets to protect their country, to protect their rights, to protect their freedoms.
But Dr. Baida, is this a representation of the majority? That's the question that even the US is asking. When we see that the people who are coming on the streets, that can happen. Even a minority can fill up the large amounts of streets and cause enough confusion. Does this, in the overwhelming kind of response that you're seeing on the streets of not only in Jerusalem but amongst the Jewish community in other parts of the world, is this a reflection of the will of the people, would you say?
Yeah, this is a good question. When you say this, whether it's a minority expression, political expression, and whether this is the will of the people, all over the world, wherever we have seen that people have on the streets to protest against injustice, okay, you will see that, some people, few people, initially they are on the streets, and then the other people, they join. Now, this question is very, very important, and we have to understand this thing. Whether we are going to compare this thing with Arab Spring, whether we will term it as, Israel Spring or not, okay. But the most critical point, okay, of understanding what I understand, from a different perspective, it is not that people are protesting only on the streets. It seems that when we are reading this newspaper every day, morning, evening, we are reading that it is almost all walks of the people from Israel and outside Israel, they are joining. Airport, okay, airport, there was a strike in the airport. Yeah, we have seen that diplomatic mission all over the world, they have also joined, including India. Including India, we have read this from Israel embassy that they have joined. Okay? So this is unprecedented, and it is, that's why I said that it is all walks of the life. The people have joined. Why people have joined all walks of the life? It cannot be termed that only the minority Jewish people they are there and they are just protesting. No, it is not. If it would have been the case, then we would not have seen this thing that it is spreading all over the world and then diplomatic missions. This is unprecedented, I must say.
Okay, so actually, well, the protest did slow down after the pause was put on the judicial reforms. And we do not know the size of protests now against the National Guard. Actually, the visuals that we were showing you were from the earlier protests. But the point is that, if these protests are just as large as the earlier ones, then there's something about this coalition that's not going to hold because either Ben Javir, who's trying to negotiate hard for a hardline position, will remove his support to Benjamin Netanyahu, then the government will collapse if Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't seem to give in, and then Israel goes in for another round of elections. Would you think that that is probably the best scenario? Because I mean, the people are trying to say something to their government.
We are noticing this thing that continuously the fall of the government for the last 4 years, one after another. So if this happens, okay, and if there is another fall of the government, there is nothing new. That is not going to change anything in Israel, in my understanding. But what is happening at this point of time, if it is persistent, if the protesters they continue their movements, even if they have they will strategize things, they might will slow down, something like that. But if it is a sustained protest against this the judicial overhaul, then I see there will be change, not the change of the government or the fall of the government, because it is happening in Israel. It's nothing new, actually.
Okay. We leave it there. Thank you very much, Dr. Seema Baidia, for enlightening us on the subject. It is a deeper, discussion. There are many other issues involved when we talk about Arab-Israeli relations, the reasons why Israel's hardline government is pushing this kind of an agenda, and the backlash or the reactions from the people. It seems that Israel is on course for, some sort of reformation from within. But our next story comes from the U.S., where the Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen is transiting through the United States for 3 days. She's on her way to Belize and Guatemala, and the Chinese, they are concerned about whom she's going to be meeting in the United States. And the U.S. doesn't officially recognize Taipei, we know, but the U.S. supports Taipei in its security-related affairs, especially against aggression. So Belize and Guatemala are among the few countries, only 13 countries left, that do recognize Taipei as a sovereign country. Let's look at this report.
Defiant Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen arrived in New York despite criticism and warnings from China. She reached on a sensitive U.S. stopover on Wednesday, vowing en route to not let external pressure prevent the island from engaging with the world, though China has threatened retaliation if she met U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
And then, as you also know, this week, Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen begins transiting the United States. This transit is consistent with our long-standing unofficial relationship with Taiwan, and it is consistent with the United States One China policy, which remains unchanged. It is Taiwan's decision to make these transits based on their own travel. Transits are not visits, they are private, and they're unofficial.
The White House also urged China not to use a normal stopover in the United States by Taiwan's president as a pretext to increase aggressive activity against Taiwan.
The People's Republic of China should not use this transit as a pretext to step up any aggressive activity around the Taiwan Strait. The United States and China have differences when it comes to Taiwan, but we have managed those differences for more than 40 years. President Biden and this administration has been keeping the lines of communication open with Beijing. We want to see that continue on this issue and other issues across the board.
Dozens of political parties and organizations in Taiwan have staged joint protests in Taipei to voice their opposition to the potential meeting between the island's leader Tsai Ing-wen and some American anti-China politicians. The joint campaign protested against Tsai's planned meeting in the United States, arranged under the pretext of a so-called transit plan, viewing the meeting as an attempt to seek Taiwan's independence.
It is by no means possible that we will allow our future generations to be ruined by warmongers like US. Waves of moves by the US with its plan to destroy Taiwan have pushed Taiwan to the verge of war. If we still refuse to take actions to save ourselves, we would not be worthy of our future generations, Taiwan society and our home built by older generations.
Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Mao Ning on Wednesday said China firmly opposed any form of official interaction between the United States and the Taiwan region.
China firmly opposes any form of official interaction between the US and the Taiwan region, firmly opposes any visit by the Taiwan independence separatist leaders to the US in any name and under whatever pretext, and firmly opposes all forms of US contact with the Taiwan authorities, which violates the One China principle. China has repeatedly conveyed solemn presentations to the US over Tsai Ing-wen's transit through the US. The reported trip is not so much a transit, but an attempt to seek breakthroughs and propagate Taiwan independence. It is not China's overreaction, but the support of the US for the Taiwan independence separatist forces are of a bad nature. It is not China, but the US and the Taiwan independence separatist forces that stirred up trouble over the issue.
Tsai is en route to Guatemala and Belize, two of the few countries that recognize Taiwan diplomatically. China, which claims democratically ruled Taiwan as its own territory, has repeatedly warned US officials not to meet Tsai, who is on her first US stopover since 2019, seeing it as showing support for the island's desire to be seen as a separate country. And this is not for the first time that China has done this. China staged major war games around Taiwan in August when the then US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taipei. Taiwan's armed forces say they are watching for any Chinese moves when Tsai is abroad. World Today Desk, DD India.
At the annual Bao Forum of Asia Conference in China, the Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez called for respecting the rules-based world order. And he said that a fragmented world is dominated by protectionist tendencies, and that represents a return to the past with all the shadows and uncertainties of the past. The IMF chief Georgieva said that countries in a relatively stronger position now should be helping vulnerable members of the global community. Here's the report.
The Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2023 held in Boao, Hainan under the theme An Uncertain World, Solidarity and Cooperation for Development Amid Challenges. The international development opportunities afforded by the Belt and Road Initiative were hailed by speakers and attendees alike at the ongoing Boao Forum for Asia. Panelists from countries spoke at a session on the initiative, repeatedly pointing to tangible benefits that it has brought to their countries. This year's conference resumed offline meetings.
No matter how the world situation may evolve, we will stay committed to reform, opening up and innovation-driven development. We will continue to inject new vigor and vitality into the global economic development and welcome countries around the world to share the opportunities and benefits that come with China's development.
The most fresh data is that this middle corridor has transported 1.5 million tons of goods in 2022. That's 50% more than in 21. And which is more important, the Kazakhs' own export in that has grown 6.5 times compared to the previous years.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez also delivered a speech at the BAO's forum.
I firmly believe in a rules-based international order. Free, balanced and fair trade is essential if we want stability and prosperity for all. A fragmented world dominated by protectionist tendencies represents a return to the past, with all its shadows and uncertainties. What is happening is a change in the way globalization is conceived and articulated. Production costs are no longer the only criteria to decide where to locate production facilities. Safety, environmental footprint, and above all, reliability have now gained relevance.
Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim said on Thursday that competition should not lead to division in the technological world, as that would only increase costs and impede progress.
The rivalry to be ahead in this can take either a productive or destructive turn. On the one hand, we need to recognize that countries will always seek to protect their intellectual property rights and try to stay ahead on the competition. On the other hand, we need to establish certain guardrails so that the competition does not lead to bifurcation in the technological world, one that will raise costs and impede progress.
The International Monetary Fund Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva said that countries in a relatively stronger position should help vulnerable nations, especially those under debt distress.
Over the past 3 years, we have seen low-income and vulnerable countries and people being particularly severely hit. Solidarity starts at home, with governments protecting vulnerable people in their own countries. This means fiscal policy providing targeted support to those most in need, those most affected by food insecurity or the cost of living crisis. And it also means countries in a relatively stronger position helping vulnerable members of our global community.
Founded in 2001, the BFA is a non-governmental and non-profit international organization committed to promoting regional economic integration and bringing Asian countries closer to their development goals. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, one of the world's most important courts will advise states on their responsibilities for curbing global emissions and the legal consequences of inaction following unprecedented consensus on the subject at the United Nations. In fact, at the General Assembly meeting in New York, governments approved a resolution recognizing the huge challenge of climate change and calling on the International Court of Justice to provide an advisory opinion on how it intersects with international law. An advisory opinion from the ICJ interprets existing international law rather than creating new legal obligations, and it is not legally binding, but it is highly influential. Here's the report.
The United Nations General Assembly voted on Wednesday to pass a resolution asking the world's top court to define the obligations of states to combat climate change, a legal opinion that could drive countries to take stronger measures and clarify international law. The historic resolution seeking an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice made it to the UN General Assembly after a 4-year campaign led by Republic of Vanuatu and was passed with a consensus vote. It was inspired by the Pacific Island law students who want the international legal system to deliver climate justice. The push for the resolution was driven by Vanuatu Prime Minister Ismail Kalskaku and a core group of 18 countries ranging from Costa Rica to Germany.
The court will help to clarify the other legal instruments under international law that also contain climate obligations. Importantly, the court will tell us what the legal consequences are for states that disregard these laws and cause climate and environmental harm. Vanuatu sees today's historic resolution as the beginning of a new era in multilateral climate cooperation, one that is more fully focused on upholding the rule of international law, and an era that places human rights and international equity at the forefront of climate decision making.
Countries will submit input over the next year, and it could take the court around 18 months to issue an advisory opinion that could clarify financial obligations countries have on climate change, help them revise and enhance national climate plans submitted to the Paris Agreement, and strengthen domestic policies and legislations. The resulting advisory opinion could be a vital input to the burgeoning climate-driven lawsuits around the world, and there are upward of 2,000 cases pending worldwide. On the eve of the vote, Vanuatu diplomats were still trying to win support from China and US, or at least to convince the two biggest greenhouse gas emitting countries not to raise objections. Vanuatu and other vulnerable countries are already grappling with the powerful impacts of the heating planet. The South Pacific island nation has been slammed by a powerful climate-fueled cyclones, including 2 this month that left 10% of its population still in evacuation centers. The latest report by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change warned that to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, greenhouse gas emissions must be nearly halved by 2030.
The IPCC report shows that limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is achievable, but time is running out. The window is rapidly closing to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. This is the critical decade for climate action. It must happen on our watch.
United States did not support the resolution at the General Assembly. Bangladesh called the resolution's passage a defining moment that can help bridge the gap between climate finance promises made to vulnerable countries and what is delivered.
We hope this resolution and the consequent advisory opinion will provide a better understanding of the legal implications of climate change under international law and the rights of present and future generations to be protected from climate change.
A Pacific Island student said that she was in disbelief after the United Nations General Assembly voted to pass a landmark climate change resolution, a wild idea that came from her classroom 4 years ago.
It's amazing to see and humbling to see how this wild idea that we had 4 years ago make its way from our classroom in the University of the South Pacific to the table or the floor of the United Nations General Assembly, and to receive such a historic UN vote. They vote by consensus. So that is, I still can't believe it's happened.
Other international courts and tribunals are also being asked to clarify and define the law around climate obligations, including the Inter-American Court of Human Rights and the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. Bureau Report, DD India.
Important resolution passed by the UN, and hopefully the ICJ will also follow suit with good guidelines. Now, the festival of Ram Navami is being celebrated across the country with full traditional devotion and gaiety. According to religious beliefs, Ram Navami marks the birth of Lord Ram and is celebrated on the 9th day of Navratri. The day marks the victory of good over evil. It stands for positivity, prosperity and hope. On this day, a large number of devotees visit temples to pay obeisance to Lord Ram. And time now for the business news. And for business today, let me go across to Tanvi Taneja.
Thank you, Mark. So as the world is abuzz with artificial intelligence and ChatGPT programs, Elon Musk and a group of artificial intelligence experts and industry executives are calling for a 6-month pause in developing systems more powerful than OpenAI's newly launched GPT-4 in an open letter citing potential risks to society. The letter was signed by more than 1,000 people, including Musk,
Microsoft and Alphabet, however, have declined to comment on the letter. Earlier this month, Microsoft-backed OpenAI unveiled the fourth iteration of its GPT, that's Generative Pre-trained Transformer AI program, which has wowed users by engaging them in human-like conversation, composing songs and summarizing lengthy documents. Musk said earlier this month, AI stresses me out. He is one of the co-founders of industry leader OpenAI, and his car maker Tesla uses artificial intelligence for an autopilot system. Musk, who has expressed frustration over regulators critical of efforts to regulate the autopilot system, has sought a regulatory authority to ensure that development of AI serves the public interest. Tesla last month had to recall more than 362,000 US vehicles to update software after US regulators said that the driver assistance system could cause crashes, prompting Musk to tweet that the word recall for an over-the-air software update is anachronistic and just flat wrong. Meanwhile, the UK government unveiled proposals for an adaptable regulatory framework around AI. All these concerns come as ChatGPT attracts US lawmakers' attention with questions about its impact on national security and education. EU police force Europol warned on Monday about the potential misuse of the system in phishing attempts, disinformation and cyber crime. In related news, Alphabet's Google Cloud has accused Microsoft of anti-competitive cloud computing practices and criticized imminent deals with several European cloud vendors, saying these do not solve broader concerns about its licensing terms. In Google Cloud's first public comments on Microsoft and its European deals, its vice president Amit Zaveri said that the company has raised the issue with antitrust agencies and urged European Union antitrust regulators to take a closer look. There is an intense rivalry between these two US tech giants in the fast-growing multi-billion-dollar cloud computing business, where Google trails market leader Amazon and Microsoft. Now, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez on Thursday urged Asian countries to reciprocate and open their markets to Western companies. For bilateral trade to flourish, a regulatory framework allowing domestic and foreign companies to compete on an equal footing needs to be established, Sanchez said in a speech at an economic forum in China. And talking of stock market news now, key Asian stock markets were mixed on Thursday following a recent run-up, with the banking sector worries easing and traders weighing central banks' interest rate plans in the wake of the recent turmoil. Investors have taken heart from reassurance by authorities around the world that the fallout from the collapse of the US regional banks and the takeover of Credit Suisse was contained. So China's Shanghai Composite Index added 0.7%, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index was up 0.6%. South Korea's Kospi Index advanced 0.4%, but Japan's Nikkei 225 Index was down 0.4%. And overnight on Wall Street, key US stock indices ended sharply higher on Wednesday, with the Nasdaq and S&P 500 jumping more than 1% each. The upbeat outlooks from Micron Technology and other companies eased some worries about the economy. The memory chip maker late Tuesday forecast a drop in third quarter revenue in line with Wall Street expectations. It gave a rosy outlook for 2025, with artificial intelligence boosting sales. Investors are trying to gauge whether turmoil in the banking system may be subsiding and what they may mean for Federal Reserve's policy decisions. So the S&P 500 gained 1.4%, the Nasdaq Composite Index gained 1.8%, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose almost 1%.
Today, it looks like people are just kind of breathing a sigh of relief. Frankly, we have interest rate volatility that's coming down, and that's leading to equity volatility that's coming down. It's leading to risk managers being able to put more money at work, and we are having a little bit of I guess some fears about more banks failing are starting to subside, and that is leading to people just basically willing to put money back into this market ahead of some GDP and inflation figures that we're getting next week.
So that's it from the world of business for now. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks a lot, Tanvi. And now let's get you some stories that are beyond the headlines.
Children's animated character Shaun the Sheep landed safely back in Britain on Wednesday after joining NASA for its trip to the moon with Artemis 1 last year. A photo wall honoring Sean was unveiled at Ugman Animation Studios in Bristol, where a figurine of the cartoon character was awarded a certificate celebrating the achievement. According to Dr. David Parker, Director of Exploration at the European Space Agency, a 16 meters tall model of Sean the sheep covered 1.4 million miles during its round trip to the moon and back again. Pop stars Lizzo and Harry Styles have each had their life stories told in new comic books. Styles is part of the Tidal Wave Productions Fame series, where Lizzo joins the Female Force collection. In 24 pages, the glossy comic shares Melissa Vivian Jefferson's journey to the popular star we know her now as Lizzo. The biographical comic chronicles her life in Detroit, Michigan, Texas and Minnesota, in addition to her professional successes and her love life. Fans of Styles will learn about the early life in England with his parents and his schooling. The comic moves on to sharing the details of his career with One Direction before his Grammy Award-winning solo career. 20 top Belgian chocolate chefs exhibited a collection of outlandish Easter creations, from a jewel-encrusted Fabric-style egg to an Eastern Island Moai statue. The 50 to 60 centimeters tall eggs, all edible but not for sale, were exposed on plinths worthy of an art museum in a chic Brussels hotel, where members of the public could come and meet the chefs. It took British-born chocolatier Michael Lewis Anderson only one day to make his royal blue Fabric-style eggs using 45 kilograms of chocolate. World Today Desk, DD India.
Well, that's what we got you from Beyond the Headlines, but now it's time to get you the sports news. And Deepika has the sports news. Over to you, Deepika.
Thanks and good evening, Mark. Let's quickly take a look at all that is passing in the world of sports. To begin with cricket first, well, Bangladesh comfortably saw off Ireland by 77 runs to secure an unassailable 2-0 lead in the 3-match T20 series in Chittagong. A delayed start because of rain led to the match being reduced to 17 overs per side, but the hosts still racked up a formidable total of 202 for a loss of 3 wickets. Lytton Das top scored with 83 of 41 balls, with Roni Talukdar hitting 44 runs. Ireland struggled in their reply, Curtis Camphor making 50 and Shakib Al Hassan ending with figures of 5 for 20. Home captain Shakib also contributed an unbeaten 38 in an innings that saw Ben White take the wickets of prolific openers Das and Talukdar, who put together a spirited partnership of 124. Bangladesh defeated Ireland by 22 runs in their opening rain-affected T20 encounter on Monday, with the third of their 3 games taking place on Friday. The hosts won the preceding 3-match one-day international series by 2-0, and the teams will meet for a one-off test in early April. Moving on, Indonesia has been stripped of the right to host the Under-20 Soccer World Cup. The decision to remove Indonesia as host was taken off after its football federation said it had cancelled the draw after the governor of Bali refused to host Israel's team. Here's a report.
Indonesia, who was given the hosting rights for the Under-20 World Cup, has been stripped of the rights to host the World Cup only 8 weeks before the start of the tournament, amid political turmoil regarding Israel's participation. The decision to remove Indonesia as the host of the tournament was taken after its football federation said it had cancelled the draw after the governor of the largely Hindu island of Bali refused to host Israel's team. The decision followed a meeting in Doha between Indonesian Football Federation President Erick Thohir and Gianni Infantino, football's world governing body.
I hereby guarantee Israel's participation has nothing to do with the consistency of our foreign policy position toward Palestine, because our support for Palestine is always strong and steady. And regarding the Under-20 World Cup, we agree with the statement from the Palestinian ambassador to Indonesia that FIFA has rules that its members must adhere to. So don't mix sports with political matters.
FIFA further said that a new host will be announced as soon as possible, with the dates of the tournament currently remaining unchanged. Potentially, sanctions against the PSSI may also be declared at the later stage.
Currently, FIFA is aware of the rejections of the participation of Israel's national team in the Under-20 World Cup, but we from the government and PSSI continue to try to find the best solution. Hence, I have sent the chairman of PSSI, Eric Thohir, to meet with the FIFA team to find the best solution.
Bapak Erick Thohir untuk bertemu dengan.
On the other hand, Jakarta resident on Thursday lamented FIFA's decision to strip Indonesia of the rights to stage this year's Under-20 Soccer World Cup tournament, saying the actions was regrettable and should not have been influenced by politics.
Jadi di piala apapun kita udah nggak bisa.
I think it's regrettable that these kids can only be kampung or local players and will end up unable to attend any tournament because all tournaments are held by FIFA. For those old people who are unhappy that Israel is playing, please think of our children's future in football.
Di dalam olahraga bola ya.
Kan reaksi dari I feel these reactions from various fractions of Indonesia that are boycotting Israel are deeply regrettable. I don't think sports should be influenced by politics.
Di dalam kancah olahraga kita menyangkutkan soal agama dengan.
Why do we have to put religion and politics together with sports? If FIFA stops this, then they have the right to stop any person, any nation or country from playing football.
Melarang satu bangsa untuk main di dalam.
Israel qualified in June of last year for its first Under-20 World Cup, but the country's participation in the official draw for the tournament groups scheduled to be held Friday in Bali provoked political opposition this month. A total of 24 teams were scheduled to play in the youth tournament across 6 Indonesian cities from May 20th to June 11th, in which Israel have qualified for the first time. Sports Desk, DD India.
Summer set a world record in the 400-meter freestyle on the opening night of Canadian swimming trials, the 16-year-old shaving 0.32 seconds off the mark set by Australia's Ariane Titmus last year. Summer finished in a time of 3 minutes 56.08 seconds at Toronto Pan Am Sports Centre to beat Titmus's time of 3 minutes 56.4 seconds.
Summer McIntosh continued her meteoric rise in swimming by breaking the women's 400-meter freestyle world record at the Canadian trials. The 16-year-old stopped the clock in 3.56.08 in Toronto, knocking 0.32 off the previous record that had been set by Australian's reigning Olympic champion Ariane Titmus, who took her record off reigning world champion Katie Ledecky. Subsequently, McIntosh is also now the Canadian Commonwealth and World Junior record holder in the event, taking the last 2 accolades off Titmus and Ledecky. After breaking her first world record in Toronto, McIntosh said, "I didn't think the world record was a possibility, but you never know." The giant trio of women's freestyle swimming could all meet in the 400-meter free at the 2023 World Championships in Fukuoka, Japan this July, before another possible showdown at the Olympic Games Paris 2024. It was the latest achievement in what has been a stellar 2023 so far for McIntosh, who broke 3 junior world records in 3 days at the Pro Swim Series earlier this month. McIntosh, whose mother swam at the Olympic Games Los Angeles 1984, became the youngest individual world champion in swimming since Chevanier in 2011. The most difficult choice for the aquatic prodigy going forward could be which events to focus on given her impressive versatility. She is also the world champion in the 400-meter individual medley and the 200-meter butterfly after taking out those titles in Budapest, aged just 15. The Canadian teen made her Olympic debut aged 14 at Tokyo 2020, where she finished 4th in the 200-meter freestyle. She bagged gold in the 200-meter butterfly and 400-meter medley at the World Championships in 2022, as well as 2 golds at the Commonwealth Games in the 200-meter and 400-meter medleys. She now trains in Florida under coach Brent R.K. with the Sarasota Sharks team. McIntosh's record marks the first long course defined as being swum in a 50-meter pool length, world record set by a Canadian since Kylie Massey's 100-meter backstroke at the 2017 World Championships, according to Swimming Canada. Sports Desk, DD India.
Moving on to soccer now, Arsenal beat Bayern Munich by 2-0 in front of a record crowd of 21,307 fans at the Emirates on Wednesday to make it to the semi-finals of the Women's Champions League. First half goals from Frida and Stina were all Jonas Eidewall's side needed to overturn their 1-0 deficit from the opening leg of the quarterfinals to advance by 2-1 on aggregate after the second leg. Now it will be the Gunners' first appearance in the semi-finals since 2013, and they could be joined by another English side if Chelsea advance past Lyon in the quarter-final round that they currently lead by 1-0 after their first leg. So that was a quick wrap from the world of sports. Back to you, Mark.
Thanks a lot, Deepika. And now let's see what made history on this day in history.
On 30th of March in the year 1899, Shraddhanendu Bandyopadhyay, Bengali writer and creator of the detective Byomkesh Bakshi, was born in Jaunpur, Uttar Pradesh. On the same day in the year 1908, Devika Rani, legendary actress and first recipient of Dadasaheb Phalke Award, was born at Voltaire in Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh. On the same day in the year 1959, Dalai Lama flees China and is granted political asylum in India. On the very same day in the year 1842, ether anesthesia was used for the first time in an operation by the American surgeon Dr. Crawford Long. On the same day in the year 1856, Treaty of Paris was signed. At last, on the same day in the year 1954, the Yonge Street subway line opened in Toronto. It was the first subway in Canada. World Today Desk, DD India.
And with that, we conclude World Today. Thank you very much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the program. Namaskar.